Damian Kael was not born rich. He was not handed anything. When he was 19 years old, he owned a second-hand truck, a set of worn-out tools, and a notebook full of plans that people around him called foolish. His mother worked 2 jobs. His father had left when Damian was 7. There was no safety net, no family money, no one to call when things went wrong. But Damian had something that money could not buy. He had a mind that refused to stay still. Every morning, before the sun came up, he was already thinking, planning, calculating, asking himself what needed to be done today that would matter 5 years from now. While other young men his age slept in and spent their weekends doing nothing, Damian drove that old truck across the city, offering small delivery services to local shops. He charged fair prices, showed up on time every single time, and never made a promise he could not keep. Word spread. It always does when someone is truly good at what they do. By the time he was 25, he had a small fleet of trucks. By 30, he had moved into real estate, buying old properties in parts of the city nobody else wanted, fixing them up, and turning them into places people were proud to live in. By 35, he had expanded into natural resources and supply chain management. His company grew the way a great tree grows, slowly at first, then all at once, and with roots so deep that nothing seemed capable of shaking it. People in his city started calling him the Alpha King, not because he asked them to, not because he put it on a business card or used it in a meeting. They called him that because when Damian Kael walked into a room, something shifted. He did not shout or demand attention. He simply carried himself with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from years of hard work and honest living. When he spoke, people listened. When he made a decision, people trusted it. He married Celine when he was 28. She was brilliant and beautiful, and carried herself with the same calm strength that he admired in people. They built a life together. A large home in the Highlands, 3 children, and a marriage that looked, from the outside, like a partnership built on solid ground. Their eldest, Marcus, was 17, and already serious in the way his father had been at that age. Their daughter Lyra, 13, loved music and had her mother's eyes. Their youngest, little Eli, was 9 years old and saw the world through a lens of pure joy. He laughed easily, asked 1,000 questions a day, and made everyone around him feel lighter. Damian loved his family deeply. He did not always say it the way people say it in movies. He showed it in other ways. In the hours he worked so they would never worry, in the school he chose for his children, in the way he sat quietly beside Celine at the end of a long day and simply let the silence between them be enough. It was not a perfect life, but it was a real one, and for a long time, it was more than enough. Then the ground shifted, and it all began to come apart. His name was Henrik Voss. Damian had known him for over 20 years. They had met as young men, both hungry and ambitious, both building something from nothing. Henrik had gone through hard times, serious ones. Damian had been there for him through every single one. He lent him money when Henrik's mother fell ill. He pulled him back from the edge of financial ruin not once but twice. He gave him a seat at the table of his company, a position of real power and real trust. Henrik Voss was not just a business partner, he was family. Or at least, that was what Damian believed. The truth was different. And by the time Damian discovered it, the damage had already been done. For 3 years, 3 full years, Henrik had been working quietly inside Damian's empire to tear it apart from within. He had formed a secret arrangement with 3 of Damian's major investors, men who smiled at business dinners and then went home to plan his destruction. Together, they had rerouted company funds through accounts that Damian had never seen, created false documents that carried Damian's name, and built a carefully designed trap that, when it was sprung, would make the whole collapse look like Damian's own fault. A routine financial review discovered the first signs of trouble. Numbers were wrong in ways they should not have been. Accounts existed that Damian had never approved. His signature appeared on papers he had never touched. His legal advisor, Priya Menon, brought him the findings in a meeting that lasted 4 hours and left both of them sitting in silence at the end. The word she used was fraud, but Damian was not the one who had committed it. He was the one it had been committed against. Everything happened quickly after that. Government investigators froze his business accounts while the situation was examined. News outlets picked up the story, and because the early reports were confused and incomplete, many of them painted Damian as the wrongdoer. Former allies stopped returning calls. Investors who had praised him publicly now refused to be associated with his name. Business partners who had sat at his table and eaten his food sent letters through lawyers instead of calling him directly. He lost the company. He lost the properties. He lost the reputation he had spent over 2 decades building with his own hands. And then, quietly, at home, he discovered that Celine had known something was wrong for months. She had not told him. She had signed documents when Henrik asked her to, telling herself she did not fully understand what they meant, telling herself it would be fine. And when everything collapsed, she did not stand beside her husband in the wreckage. She called her lawyer and began the process of separating their lives. The divorce was difficult. She sought full custody of the children, using the chaos of the financial investigation as her reasoning. Damian did not fight her in the way some men would have. He did not become loud or ugly about it. He accepted the immediate terms, made sure his children were taken care of, and told each of them the same thing when they cried, "I am still here." That will never change. He moved into a small rented room on the edge of the city. It was nothing like the home he had built. There was a single window, a narrow bed, a table, and a chair. He had almost no money. His phone still worked, but most of the people who used to fill it with messages had gone very quiet. He stayed in that room for 11 days. He did not go out. He barely slept. He wrote page after page after page in a plain notebook he bought from a corner shop for almost nothing. He did not write about his anger, though there was plenty of it. He did not write about his sadness, though that was there too. He wrote about what had happened and why. He examined every decision, every relationship, every moment where he had trusted without questioning. He looked at himself with total honesty, the kind of honesty that hurts in a clean way, like a cut that bleeds but does not get infected. He understood, sitting in that small room, that he had made a specific kind of mistake. Not a dishonest mistake, not a lazy mistake. He had confused closeness with loyalty. He had believed that because someone had been near him for a long time, they were on his side. He had given trust without checking whether it was deserved. And the people who had known this about him had used it against him. On the 12th day, Damian Kael walked out of that room. Something had changed. The people who had known him before, the ones who saw him in the months that followed, all said the same thing, in different ways. His eyes were different. Not harder exactly, clearer, like a man who had looked at the worst thing possible and decided it was not enough to stop him. He made one phone call that day, not to an investor, not to a lawyer. He called a young engineer named Cassius Chen, a man he had met and briefly mentored years earlier. Cassius had built a small technology company, nothing flashy, nothing famous, but his work was sharp and honest, and ahead of where most people were looking. Damian had always respected the quality of his thinking. They met at a small coffee shop that neither of them would have visited during the better years. Damian ordered 1 cup of tea. Cassius ordered nothing. And Damian talked for 2 hours. About an idea, about a vision, about a company that did not yet exist, but that he could see with total clarity in his mind. Cassius said yes before Damian had finished speaking. That was the beginning. They worked in a rented office space that cost very little, and looked like it. The walls were plain, the chairs were mismatched. There was no reception desk, no corporate logo on the door, no sign of any kind. Just 2 men, and, eventually, a small group of carefully chosen people who came in and worked long days for small salaries because they believed in what was being built. Damian did not look for the most impressive people this time. He looked for the most honest ones. He looked for people who were good at their work and did not spend energy pretending to be better than they were. He looked for hunger, not greed, but the kind of hunger that comes from people who have something to prove and the discipline to prove it through action. The company they built was called Kaelstone. It operated at the place where data, supply chain management, and strategic business intelligence met, a space that most large companies struggled with because it required 3 different types of expertise working in perfect coordination. Kaelstone did it seamlessly, and it did it at a level that was genuinely unlike anything currently available in the market. For 18 months, almost no one knew it existed. That was intentional. Damian had learned that noise attracts attention of all kinds, including the wrong kind. He built quietly. He signed clients quietly. He grew the team quietly. He let the work speak for itself. And he made sure the work was excellent enough that when it did speak, people stopped and listened. Meanwhile, the legal process moved forward in the background. The team of lawyers Damian had assembled were not the large, prestigious firm he had used before. They were smaller, younger, and far more focused. They had built careers around exactly this kind of case: financial wrongdoing hidden behind paperwork and false documents. They were patient, and they were thorough, and over 14 months, they built something that could not be argued with. Priya Menon, who had once been Henrik's quiet accomplice, without fully understanding the scale of what she was involved in, eventually came forward and cooperated. Her testimony filled in critical details. Former employees who had seen strange things and stayed silent out of fear finally spoke. Digital records that Henrik believed were untraceable turned out to be very traceable indeed. The day the case was officially filed, Henrik Voss was arrested at his home before 7 in the morning. The 3 investors who had worked with him faced their own charges. The story ran on the front page of every financial publication that had once printed the early, inaccurate stories about Damian's supposed wrongdoing. The correction, as corrections often do, came loudly and publicly. Damian did not attend the press event. He did not give an interview. He did not post anything online or make any public statement beyond a single, brief paragraph released through his new company's communications team that said, in simple language, that the matter had been resolved and he was grateful to everyone who had worked honestly to find the truth. He was, at the time of that release, sitting in a meeting room finalizing a major partnership agreement that would give Kaelstone its first large-scale international client. He signed the papers, thanked the people in the room, and went back to work. The world noticed. Once the name Damian Kael was publicly cleared, questions began to circulate about Kaelstone, this company that had appeared from nowhere, that had no splashy launch, no famous investors behind it, no big media coverage, and yet was somehow already operating at a level that much larger and better-funded companies had not reached. People started paying attention. Serious people, governments, hospital networks, international logistics companies, investment funds that moved carefully and chose partners with great precision. All of them arrived at the same conclusion through different routes. Kaelstone was remarkable, and the man behind it was someone they wanted to know. The company's value grew in a way that serious analysts described, carefully and in professional language, as extraordinary. Within 2 years of its founding, Kaelstone had secured contracts across 4 continents. Within 3 years, it was operating in sectors that Damian had never previously worked in. The empire he had lost, the one that had seemed so large and so permanent before it fell, looked, in comparison, like the early chapter of a much longer story. But the moment that Damian would later describe as the most important of his return had nothing to do with contracts or company valuations or news coverage. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, ordinary in every way, when his son Marcus flew in without much warning and sat across from him in the sparse, simple office that Damian had chosen for himself deliberately. No artwork on the walls, no expensive furniture, nothing to impress anyone. Marcus was 19 now. He had his father's eyes and his father's way of sitting very still when something important was being said. He looked at his father for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "I understand now. I understand what you are made of." Damian did not respond immediately. He looked at his son, this young man he had watched grow up, and felt something settle inside him that had been unsettled for a very long time. A few weeks later, Lyra played a recital at her school. Damian drove himself there and sat in the second row, not the front, not where he could be seen or photographed, just a seat in the middle of a room full of parents and friends. He watched his daughter play with the complete attention of a man who had learned, the hard way, what it meant to be truly present. When she finished, she looked out into the audience, found his face, and smiled. And then there was Eli, 9 years old when everything fell apart, now 12, still full of laughter, still asking 1,000 questions a day. He called one evening, past his usual bedtime, and asked in his bright, easy voice if he could come and stay for the summer. Damian was standing at the window of his office, looking out over the same city that had once printed his name, alongside words like scandal and collapse. He pressed the phone to his ear and said, quietly, "Yes, come. There is room." The world wrote many things about Damian Kael in the years that followed. They called it a comeback. They called it a triumph. Business schools used his story as a case study in resilience and strategic rebuilding. Journalists tried to find the formula, the secret, the specific set of decisions that had turned total ruin into something this significant. What they could not fully capture, because they had not been in the small rented room, had not sat with him through those 11 days, had not seen the plain notebooks filled with the private accounting of a man deciding what kind of person he intended to be, was the real truth of what had happened. Damian Kael had not simply recovered from a fall. He had been taken apart, piece by piece, and had chosen, with clear eyes and a steady hand, to put himself back together as something better. The man who returned was not the same man who had fallen. He was more careful with trust, not because he was afraid, but because he now understood the difference between people who love what you have built and people who love who you are. He was more patient, more present, less impressed by noise, and more drawn to quiet excellence. He had learned that the most dangerous things in a person's life are often not the enemies on the outside, but the assumptions on the inside. The belief that someone is trustworthy simply because they have been close for a long time. The belief that success is permanent. The belief that what has been built cannot be taken. He had also learned something that could not be found in any business book or leadership course. He had learned that the most important thing a man can build is not a company. It is not a reputation, not a financial empire, not a legacy that strangers admire. The most important thing is the ability to sit in a small room with nothing left and still choose to stand up, still choose to begin again, still choose to remain, in the deepest part of himself, the person he decided to be. That is the power no one could take from him. That is the power that came back with him when he walked out of that rented room on the 12th day. And that is the power, quiet, certain, and built from something far harder than money, that no force in the world had ever been able to imagine, let alone touch.